The restaurant was the kind of place people booked weeks in advance, where the chandeliers dripped crystal like frozen rain and the leather booths still smelled new despite being polished every night. It was where politicians made deals, where celebrities tried to hide behind menus, and where the staff rehearsed their smiles in the mirror before stepping into the dining room. Everyone working there understood the unspoken truth: people didn't come just for the food, they came to be seen. Tonight, the air felt heavier than usual, energized by the murmurs that drifted from table to table. News traveled fast among restaurant staff, especially when it involved someone like Alexander Roth. Even before he arrived, chefs were adjusting their jackets, waiters were checking their hair in the reflection of polished silver, and the manager walked around with the tension of a man preparing for an earthquake. Alexander Roth didn't just have a reputation, he had a legend. The kind of CEO whose shadow was almost more powerful than his presence. Cold. Sharp-tongued. Brilliant. A man whose tone alone could make a grown executive reconsider their entire career. And tonight, he had chosen their restaurant for dinner. People had different reactions whenever someone mentioned him. Some admired him, others feared him, and a few whispered wild rumors that he could fire an entire department with a single email, or that he never smiled, not even as a child. But the staff knew only one thing for certain: if you made even the smallest mistake serving him, you wouldn't just be embarrassed, you'd be immortalized as the person who messed up in front of Roth. When the glass doors opened and he stepped inside, the effect was instant. Conversations didn't stop, but they thinned, softened, like the restaurant itself wanted to step aside for him. Alexander didn't walk, he moved with a controlled, silent confidence, as if the world naturally parted for him. Tall, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray, with deep-set eyes that missed nothing and tolerated even less. He didn't greet the host. He barely nodded. He simply accepted his reserved table as if it were a throne waiting for him. The waitress assigned to him that night was Lena. She wasn't the newest on staff, but she wasn't the most experienced either. She had a softness to her that made people assume she was shy, quiet footsteps, gentle voice, the kind of presence that rarely drew attention. But anyone who watched closely enough might notice the intelligence in her eyes, the way she memorized every table's needs from a single glance. Still, she preferred to stay unnoticed. That evening, she tried to appear calm even though her stomach knotted tighter with every step she took toward his table. The manager had pulled her aside before the shift and said in a low voice, "Be careful with this one. And for God's sake, do not engage him unless necessary. He doesn't like small talk. He doesn't like delays. He doesn't like mistakes." She had just nodded, because what else could she do? When she approached Alexander's table for the first time, she felt the weight of his presence before she even spoke. He didn't look up. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his jaw clenched, the kind of expression a person wears when they are planning, calculating, deciding thousands of things at once. "Good evening, sir," she said softly. "Welcome. May I bring you something to drink?" He didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, he lifted his eyes just for a breath, a cold flicker of acknowledgement, then returned his gaze to the menu. Lena waited, hands folded behind her back, praying he wouldn't think she was being pushy. Then he spoke, but not in English. His voice was crisp, firm, and delivered in rapid, polished German as he pointed to an item on the menu without truly looking at her. It wasn't unusual for tourists or business executives to order in their native language, but something about the speed and tone of his words made it clear he wasn't doing it out of politeness, he was doing it out of expectation. He assumed she wouldn't understand him. He assumed she would just nod, run to the kitchen in confusion, and fetch someone who did. Lena felt a shift inside her, something subtle but deep. She was used to people underestimating her, misjudging her, assuming she was simple or quiet or uneducated. She never corrected them because she didn't see the point. But something about this moment, his cold tone, his dismissive posture, the way he seemed to believe she wasn't worth even a direct glance, made her lift her chin just a little higher. When she replied, her voice came out steady. Clear. Fluent, sehr gern. Und mochten ces medium oder medium rare. Of course. And would you like it medium or medium rare? Alexander froze. It wasn't dramatic, he didn't drop anything or gasp, but the stillness was unmistakable. His fingers paused above his phone as if someone had switched off the world around him. Slowly, he looked up, really looked at her this time. His eyes sharpened, brows pulling tight, the usual cold calculation replaced with something closer to confusion, maybe even disbelief. Lena kept her posture calm, though her pulse hammered beneath her uniform. She waited for him to respond. but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, his gaze flicked from her face to the way she stood, as if he were reassessing her entirely. Something in his expression softened, not warm, not gentle, but uncertain. And uncertainty, on someone like him, felt powerful. "How did you," he began, but stopped before the sentence could finish. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the small pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A note she had carried with her for days, unsure if she'd ever find the courage to give it to him, unsure if he'd even care if she did. She placed it on the table beside his hand, gently but with purpose. His eyes flicked down. The sight of it made his entire body jolt, not visibly, not to anyone else, but Lena saw the tremor ripple through him, as if the paper were far heavier than it looked. His fingertips hovered above it but didn't touch, as if it might burn him. The world around them, the clinking glass, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz in the background, blurred into nothing because the handwriting on that note, it didn't belong to a stranger. It didn't belong to anyone he expected to meet tonight. It belonged to a woman whose voice he hadn't heard in 10 years, his mother. Lena saw the recognition hit him like a blow. His jaw tightened. His breath stopped. His eyes sharpened with something raw and painful, a crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. For a moment, he didn't look like a powerful CEO, or a feared business giant. He looked like a son, one who suddenly felt 12 years old again, staring at a ghost he didn't know he desperately missed. He reached for the note then, slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. His fingertips brushed the familiar script, and a muscle jumped in his cheek. Lena stood silently, giving him space even though her heart pounded violently under her ribs. When he finally looked up at her again, his voice was quieter, rougher, stripped of the sharpness it usually carried. "Where did you get this?" She didn't answer yet. She wasn't sure she could, not without everything unraveling too fast, too soon. Instead, she offered him a small, respectful nod, the kind that said there is a story, you just have to read it first. Alexander's throat worked as he forced himself to unfold the note. The paper crackled softly, an oddly fragile sound for a man who dealt daily with contracts worth billions. But this wasn't business. This wasn't power or intimidation. This was personal, deeply personal, and as he began to read, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A shadow crossed his face, something like grief mixed with disbelief, mixed with memories he had tried to bury under years of ambition and success. For a few seconds, he forgot the world around him, forgot the restaurant, forgot his reputation, forgot everything except the impossible truth unfolding in his hands. When he finally lifted his gaze again, Lena saw something break open in him. Something he had probably spent years locking away, and for the first time in a decade, Alexander Roth wasn't untouchable. He was human, and everything in Lena's life, and his, began to shift from that single moment forward. Alexander didn't move for several seconds. He just stared at the note, his fingers pressed lightly against the paper as though afraid his touch might cause it to crumble. It wasn't old, Lena had kept it carefully, but the handwriting carried a weight that time could never erase. The elegant, looping script. The soft slant of each line. The way the letters curled at the ends, like tiny flourishes. He would have recognized it even in the dark. His mother wrote like she spoke, gentle, deliberate, calm even when the world around her wasn't. His eyes skimmed the first line again, searching for mistakes, for any sign that this could be a forgery, a coincidence, anything other than what it appeared to be. But the more he read, the more the world seemed to shrink around him, pulling him back into memories he spent most of his adult life trying to escape. He could almost smell the faint lavender perfume she used, the one she dabbed on her wrists every morning before work. He could almost hear her voice, low and soothing as she hummed while making breakfast. But this note, he didn't remember it. He had never seen it before. Which meant his mother had written it without telling him, kept it somewhere he never thought to look, given it to people he never knew existed, and now it was here. I in this restaurant. I in the hands of a quiet waitress with eyes that didn't match her uniform. They held depth, something old, something burdened. When he looked up, she wasn't staring at him the way people usually did. She wasn't waiting for his approval or bracing for his anger. She was waiting for understanding. For the moment he would see the truth on the page and recognize that she had a place in his story long before they ever met. He cleared his throat. The sound felt foreign, strained. This can't be real, he said finally, but even he didn't sound convinced. Where did you get this? His voice was firm, but it carried an undertone he didn't intend, a crack of vulnerability. Lena hesitated. Not from fear, but from caution. It was given to my mother, she said softly. Many years ago. She kept it in her wallet until the day she died. She told me never to lose it. Alexander blinked, stunned. Your mother knew mine. Lena nodded. Yes. His fingers tightened around the note. The restaurant's sounds, once distant, now felt too loud, too intrusive. He hated being exposed in a public place, even more so emotionally. He was a man who kept his private world locked behind steel walls. But now, something intimate and painful had been delivered to him in the middle of a crowded dining room, and he didn't know how to control it. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Please. Sit. Lena shook her head immediately. I can't, sir. I'm working. But that wasn't acceptable to him. Not now. Not when his mother's handwriting was staring up at him from the white tablecloth. Sit, he repeated, quieter this time, not commanding, but pleading. The shift in his tone startled her. She glanced around to make sure the manager wasn't watching, then lowered herself into the seat. Her posture remained professional, but there was something fragile in the way her hands folded in her lap. He looked at her carefully now, truly seeing her for the first time. Dark eyes that held secrets. A small scar near her temple. Tiredness carved into her face, the kind that comes from a life with too many responsibilities and not enough help. She didn't look like someone who would ever cross paths with his mother. But that made the truth even more jarring. Tell me, he said, exhaling slowly. Everything. Lena shifted, her gaze drifting to the note on the table. My mother lived in Berlin when I was very young, she began. We weren't wealthy. We weren't even comfortable. She was a seamstress in a small shop. She worked long hours, sometimes overnight. I spent most of my childhood in the corner of that shop, drawing on scraps of fabric, watching her sew. Alexander listened, eyes focused and unblinking. One night, Lena continued, there was an electrical fire in the building. It spread quickly. My mother was trying to wake the other workers when a beam collapsed. She got trapped under it. I was only 6 years old. I remember the heat. The smoke. I remember crying and trying to pull the beam off her. But I couldn't. Her voice trembled, only slightly. She didn't allow it to break, and then your mother appeared, she said quietly. She didn't even hesitate. She lifted the beam enough for my mother to crawl out. She carried me outside herself. When we were safe, she kept pressing her hand on her burns, telling us she was fine. But she wasn't. Alexander's heart clenched. He remembered that night indirectly, the way his mother came home late, jacket burned, hands wrapped, smile weak but pretending. He remembered how she brushed off his questions. How she told him she simply helped someone at the market. He never knew the truth. Not the full truth. She stayed with us until the fire trucks arrived, Lena said. When my mother tried to thank her, she just smiled and said, if you ever need help again, find my son. He is not as cold as he pretends. A humorless breath escaped Alexander. His mother had always been able to see through him, back then, and evidently still now. Lena pointed to the note. She wrote that as we waited outside. She told my mother she was in a hurry and couldn't stay longer. She gave her the note and said, keep this safe. He will understand someday. He stared at the handwriting again. I had no idea. She didn't want you to, Lena said gently. My mother told me your mother insisted on keeping her identity quiet. She didn't want praise. She didn't want attention. She didn't want anyone to know she was hurt. She said, let my son think I came home late because I was busy. He has a big heart, I don't want him to worry. Alexander pressed his lips together, struggling with the flood of emotion rising inside him. He wasn't used to this sensation. He didn't know what to do with it. I looked for you for a long time, Lena continued. After my mother passed away, we struggled. A lot. I tried to stay afloat, but things got worse. My father got sick. The bills were too much. I remembered the note and hunted for every Roth in Germany. It took months to realize you had moved to London. Then more months to get enough money to come here. When I finally arrived, I wasn't sure how to find you. I only knew I had to. She smiled weakly. And then, somehow, fate decided to seat you in my section at the restaurant. He rubbed his hands over his face, overwhelmed. You could have emailed me. Wrote to the company. Anything. Lena swallowed. I tried. Her eyes lowered. I sent 3 emails to your corporate address. They were probably filtered out or ignored. I never got a reply. I thought, maybe you wouldn't care. Maybe your mother was wrong. That hit him hard. She wasn't. Lena hesitated. I wasn't going to give you the note today. I thought I would wait. Watch you. See if you truly were the man she believed you'd become. But when you spoke to me in German, she paused, choosing her words carefully. It felt like a sign. Alexander thought back to the moment he didn't return to his meal. The restaurant no longer felt like a place meant for eating or business or meetings. It felt too small, too loud, too exposed. The chandeliers above him shimmered with a brightness that irritated his eyes, and every clink of cutlery stabbed into the moment like an interruption. Lena sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing herself for decisions she expected him to reconsider at any moment, but Alexander wasn't reconsidering anything. The decision had already rooted itself in him, deeper than logic, deeper than business instincts. It came from the part of him he rarely acknowledged anymore, the part shaped by the woman whose handwriting lay between them on the table. His mother always acted from the heart, even when it cost her. And in this moment, he realized he had spent years doing the opposite, protecting himself, closing doors, building walls so high that even memories struggled to climb them. He spoke first. I want to meet him. Your father. Lena's eyes flickered with surprise. You don't have to do that. I didn't ask, I know, Alexander said gently, cutting her off. I want to. She looked down at the note, the familiar ink, the faded creases. He's in a small apartment. Not far. He's bedridden most days. I don't know if he'll even be awake at this hour. It doesn't matter, Alexander replied. Take me to him. Her breath hitched, uncertainty rippling across her expression. She had expected his help, maybe, even hoped for it. But she hadn't expected this level of involvement. This man, this CEO who had the world at his fingertips, wanted to step into her life, into the messy, painful, complicated corners she had spent years navigating alone. Let me finish my shift, she said, offering a small, practical smile. I can take you after. But Alexander shook his head. You're done for the night. I'll speak to the manager. Her eyes widened again. No, please, don't get me in trouble. I can't afford to lose this job. He stood before she finished speaking. You won't lose it. The firmness in his voice wasn't harsh, just confident, unshakable. Lena watched as he crossed the restaurant, the room shifting with his presence. People noticed him even when they tried not to. Conversations lowered. Eyes followed. The manager practically sprinted toward him, panic all over his face. Within 1 minute, maybe less, Lena was off the clock with full pay, and a promise that her job was secure. The manager even bowed to her. Bowed. She had never seen anything like it. When Alexander returned to her, she felt a mix of awe and confusion. You didn't have to do that, she murmured. He looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart stutter. You brought me a piece of my mother, he said softly. There is nothing I won't do. They left the restaurant together, the cool night air brushing past them as though welcoming the end of a long, heavy conversation. The city hummed around them, cars passing, streetlights buzzing faintly, the distant sound of laughter from a bar around the corner. But somehow, everything felt quieter than before, like the world had stepped aside to let this moment unfold. Lena led him through narrow streets, past worn brick buildings and small shops with old signs. She lived in a part of the city where rent was cheap because everything else was expensive: safety, comfort, peace. She walked quickly, as if embarrassed to let him see the neighborhood too clearly. But Alexander didn't judge. If anything, each step deepened the ache in his chest. His mother would have walked these streets without hesitation. She would have knelt beside Lena's father without pausing to think about status or wealth or image. He followed her into a modest building with peeling paint and dim lights. The elevator was broken, so they climbed 3 flights of stairs. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder, checking if he was okay with the climb. He didn't even notice he was out of breath. His mind was focused entirely on what awaited him behind her apartment door. When she unlocked it, the scent of camphor and something herbal drifted out. The lights were low. A small fan rotated slowly in the corner. The entire place could fit inside Alexander's living room twice over, yet it felt warmer, lived in, real. Photos hung on the walls, a younger Lena with her parents, smiling in ways she hadn't since he met her. A small bookshelf, overflowing with worn paperbacks. A kitchen that was far too small for a family but clearly loved anyway. She led him to a bedroom where her father lay under a thin blanket, his breathing slow but steady. The man looked frail, older than he probably was, his cheeks hollowed, his hands trembling lightly against the sheets. He looked like someone who had fought too hard for too long. "Papa," Lena whispered softly. "You have a visitor." The man's eyes fluttered open, hazy at first, then attempting to focus. When he saw Alexander, his expression shifted, from confusion, to recognition, to stunned disbelief. "You," he whispered, voice raspy. "You are her son." Alexander froze. "You knew her?" The older man nodded slowly. "Your mother. She saved us." "Your mother was an angel." Alexander swallowed hard. Praise for his mother, spoken so simply and honestly, cracked something inside him. He stepped closer to the bed. "Thank you," he said, though the words felt too small. The old man's hand lifted weakly, shaking as he reached for Alexander. Without hesitation, Alexander took it, holding it with gentle strength. The man's grip was surprisingly firm for someone so weak. "She said you would care," the man whispered. "If life ever turned against us, she said her son would be our light. But I told my wife that was too big a burden to place on a child." He smiled faintly. "But look at you now." Alexander didn't know what to say. His chest felt tight, his throat thick. "I'm here," he managed. "I will help." And he meant it in a way he had never meant anything else. Lena watched quietly from the doorway. She had seen her father endure suffering without complaint, had watched him lose strength day by day, had lived with fear for so long that hope felt like a foreign language. But seeing Alexander, a man untouchable by most, kneeling beside her father's bedside, holding his hand with a tenderness she never imagined him capable of, made her eyes sting. After a while, the older man drifted back to sleep. Lena gently adjusted his blanket, brushing his forehead before stepping back. Alexander watched her, something warm and complicated unfolding in his chest. "How long has he been like this?" he asked. "2 years," she said quietly. "It started with small things. Fatigue. Dizziness. Then it became worse. The diagnosis was late because we couldn't afford all the tests. And now it's critical." Alexander nodded slowly. He wasn't a doctor, but he had influence, resources, connections. "I'll have a medical team here tomorrow morning," he said. "The best specialists. We'll run every test, arrange treatment, whatever's needed." Lena stared at him, lips parted, disbelief clouding her eyes. "Alexander. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," he replied firmly. "This isn't a transaction." She swallowed hard. "But I feel like I'm pulling you into something heavy." He stepped closer, not too close, but close enough for her to feel the sincerity in his presence. "Lena," he said softly, "I've spent years pretending I don't feel anything. That I'm stronger alone. That I don't need anyone. But today you brought me a piece of my mother, a piece I didn't know I was missing." He lifted the note gently from his pocket. "You gave me more than you can imagine." Her eyes flickered down, then up again. "She loved you," Lena murmured. I could see it in her eyes, even back then. A silence settled between them, gentle, fragile. Lena lowered her gaze. "I wish I had met her again," she whispered. Alexander felt the heaviness of those words. "You have me," he said quietly. "And I'm not going anywhere." She looked up, startled by the softness in his expression. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, something built on shared loss and unexpected trust. Something that felt like a bridge forming between their worlds. They stood there for a long moment, the dim light of the apartment casting warm shadows around them. The city hummed softly outside, but the room felt cocooned from everything harsh and distant. Finally, Lena exhaled. "You should get some rest. You've had a long night." He shook his head. "I'm staying. At least until your father wakes again." "Alexander, I'm staying," he repeated gently. She didn't argue after that. She brought him a chair, and he sat beside the bed, watching her father breathe steadily. Lena moved quietly around the room, adjusting things, tidying up, trying to occupy her trembling hands. At one point, she glanced over and noticed the way Alexander's shoulders had relaxed for the first time since she met him. He looked less like a CEO now. Less like a man carved from steel. He looked like someone rediscovering a part of himself he thought had died with his mother, and in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, Lena realized something unexpected, something she never intended to feel. This man, feared by the world, carried a loneliness deeper than she had ever known, and tonight, he wasn't alone. As the hours passed, the two of them remained in quiet companionship. Occasionally their eyes would meet, not with awkwardness, but with a sense of shared understanding neither of them could explain. Their lives had collided in an impossible way, through a fire from the past and a note written by a woman who somehow knew this moment would come. Alexander didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would sleep that night. He tried, lying in his king-sized bed that suddenly felt too big, too empty, too cold, staring up at the ceiling while the city lights painted moving shadows across the walls. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Greta. The girl who spoke German with the warmth of home. The girl who could silence his entire boardroom just by tapping her pen. The girl whose voice, soft, steady, unexpectedly fierce, cracked something open inside him that he had kept locked for years, and then she walked away from him. He couldn't blame her. His confession had probably sounded insane. A CEO, powerful, commanding, feared by half the corporate world, suddenly standing in a restaurant kitchen like a confused schoolboy, admitting in a trembling voice that he didn't know how to talk to her. That every German word she spoke twisted into a knot inside him, pulling memories he'd buried deep. Memories of his mother whispering the same words on nights she thought he was asleep. Memories of a home he ran from too young. Memories he never learned how to love again. Greta didn't know any of that. And he didn't know how to tell her by sunrise. He was dressed, exhausted, and restless. His team would expect him in the office by 9 sharp, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, the empire could wait. He had a different priority. The restaurant opened at 7. He was standing outside at 6:55. The manager almost dropped a tray when he saw him. Mr. Adler. You, sir, we weren't expecting. I'm looking for Greta. The manager tensed. She isn't on shift today. Would you like to leave a message? Lucas didn't. He didn't even know what he wanted. But standing there in a nearly empty restaurant, the smell of fresh rolls and coffee floating between the tables, he felt a strange mix of determination and despair. He thanked the man and left, but his feet didn't carry him toward his limo. Instead, he walked. He wasn't even sure where he was going until he reached the river, the one that cut through the city like a patient ribbon. The air was cool, sharp, waking his thoughts in a way that coffee never did. He leaned on the railing, letting the wind slap his face. He was furious with himself, furious because he had handled everything wrong. He wasn't afraid of business failures, legal crises, or international negotiations. But one girl with a soft voice had reduced him to someone he didn't recognize. Maybe that was why he needed her so much. He rubbed his face, trying to shake the heaviness off, when his phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. If you still want to talk, meet me at the old library at noon. His heart slammed against his ribs. It had to be her. By 11:45, he was standing outside the old stone library, the one that had been converted into a community study hall long ago. Its walls were covered in vines, the giant wooden door carved with stories from centuries past. He remembered coming here as a teenager, long before he became the man in expensive suits who was expected to never show weaknesses. He stepped inside. The quiet swallowed him immediately. Greta was sitting at a table near the window, her notebook open but empty, her hands folded on top of it. She looked up the moment he approached. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear, only uncertainty, and something he couldn't name. Thank you for coming, he said, breathless though he had barely walked 10 steps. I almost didn't. Her voice wavered, but she kept her gaze on him. Last night, you scared me. He sat across from her, careful not to get too close. I'm sorry. I handled everything wrong. Yes, she whispered. You did. She looked down at her fingers, twisting them nervously. He had never seen her nervous before. In the restaurant, she was always composed, sharp, untouchable. Here, in the soft morning light, she looked painfully human. It hit him harder than he expected. I need to explain, he said quietly. She nodded, and that small gesture loosened something inside him. For most of my life, I ran from anything that reminded me of Germany. Of my family. Of the place I grew up. I built walls. Tall ones. He swallowed. When you spoke German to me that first night, it felt like someone hit those walls with a hammer. Greta watched him, unmoving. I didn't know how to react. It terrified me. Not because of you, but because I realized I wasn't done running. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak, and then yesterday, he continued, voice raw, you walked in and told my board what they've needed to hear for years. You said it without fear. Without hesitation. You were the only one in the room brave enough to challenge me. And instead of listening to you with the respect you deserved, I panicked. I let emotions take over. Emotions I haven't touched in decades. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. Lucas, why didn't you just say that? Because I never had to say anything real in my life, he confessed. People don't come to me for honesty. They come for results. And what do you want? She asked gently. The question hit him like a punch. He looked at her, the girl who had changed everything without knowing it. The girl who wasn't impressed by his power. The girl who somehow saw the men beneath the armor he spent years polishing. I want a chance, he said quietly. A real one. With you. Greta's breath caught. Her fingers trembled lightly on the table. Lucas, you're my boss. Yes, he said softly. Which is why I would remove that conflict immediately. Her eyes widened. You'd fire me. No, he said with a small, almost playful smile. I'd promote you. To a different department. One where our communication won't be a professional violation. Greta blinked, stunned. You'd do that. For me. I'd do anything, he said without hesitation. You deserve a workplace where you're safe, respected, and free of any power imbalance. If you ever choose to talk to me outside of work, it should be because you want to, not because you're afraid to say no. Silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't the tense silence of last night. It was fragile, hopeful. Greta drew in a shaky breath. Lucas, when you spoke German in the kitchen last night, did you know you sounded like you were begging? He closed his eyes. Yes. And do you know why that scared me? He shook his head, because no one has ever begged for me before. He opened his eyes. Her cheeks were flushed, her lashes trembling. She wasn't angry. She wasn't confused. She was overwhelmed, just like him. Greta, he whispered, I'm not asking for anything now. Not even your answer. Just let me try again. Let me treat you the way I should have from the beginning. She tried to look away, but her gaze kept pulling back to him. I don't know how to trust what I'm feeling, she admitted softly. Everything is happening so fast. That's all right, he said gently. We can go slow. She exhaled shakily. You mean, really slow? As slow as you need. Her lips curved into the softest smile he had ever seen. And you won't freeze again when I speak German. He felt laughter bubble in his chest for the first time in days. I'll probably freeze every time. But at least now you'll know why. Greta looked down, brushing her thumb over the corner of her notebook. Can I ask you something? Anything. What did I say, in German? The part that made you freeze the most. He remembered it perfectly. Every syllable still echoed in his bones. You told me the steak was overcooked, he said teasingly. She laughed, finally, beautifully. I did. But that wasn't the part, he added, voice dropping. The part that froze me was when you said, if you want it fixed, you have to trust me. Greta's breath hitched. That line had been casual, work-related. She hadn't meant anything by it, but to him, it had felt like a direct challenge to the walls he lived behind. Slowly, cautiously, she reached across the table and placed her hand near his. Not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. I can't promise anything yet, she whispered. You don't have to, he whispered back, but, she breathed out softly. I do want to see where this goes. His heart stopped, then lurched back to life. He didn't take her hand. He didn't dare. Not until she made the final step, and she did. Her fingers curled gently around his, fitting perfectly, naturally, like they were meant to find each other in a quiet old library on an ordinary morning. Lucas closed his eyes, letting the moment settle deep into him. Maybe he wasn't done running, maybe he was finally ready to stop, and maybe, just maybe, he had stopped in front of the right person. Lucas didn't realize how tightly he had been holding his breath until Greta's fingers settled into his, and every part of him, every tense muscle, every anxious thought, loosened in a slow, unfamiliar exhale. Her touch wasn't firm or claiming, it was tentative, curious, almost shy. But it grounded him. It felt like the first step onto solid ground after years of wandering across ice. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The old library hummed around them with soft rustling pages and distant footsteps, but the world felt strangely small, shrinking until it held only the table, the sunlight, and the shared warmth of their hands. When Greta finally pulled back, it was with a soft sigh, as if she was trying to steady herself. Lucas didn't reach after her, though every instinct told him to. He let her set the pace. Let her breathe. Let her regain her footing. I still don't understand you, she murmured. That makes two of us, he admitted. She looked up quickly, startled by the honesty, and something in her expression softened. She wasn't used to seeing vulnerability in him, he could tell. Most people never had. Most people only saw a polished version of him, all edges and efficiency. But Greta saw the unsteady parts, and she didn't look away. What happens now? She asked quietly. I thought, he said, choosing his words carefully, that maybe we could spend time together outside of work. Not romantically. Not yet. Just as two people learning each other. Her brows lifted. Like friends. He almost winced. If that's what you need first, yes. A hint of a smile tugged at her lips. She noticed his discomfort, he could tell. You don't like the word friends. I like you too much for that word. Her smile broke fully then, a warm, startled, genuine smile that lit her entire face. Lucas, you say things so plainly. It surprises me. I'm still not very good at hiding things, he admitted. No, she murmured. You're really not. Their conversation drifted then, softly, cautiously, like two people walking along a shoreline, afraid of stepping too deep too quickly. She asked him about his childhood, and though he didn't tell her everything, he told her enough. About moving countries too young. About a father who worked endlessly and a mother who spoke to him in German only at night, when she thought he missed home but couldn't say it aloud. He found himself confessing things he had never spoken aloud. Not to anyone. Greta listened with a stillness he didn't know how to interpret at first. She wasn't judging, wasn't pitying, just absorbing, like every word mattered. When she finally spoke, it was with a voice so gentle it nearly undid him. That must have been very lonely. He blinked, stunned by how precisely she had cut into the truth. He expected sympathy or questions or quiet nodding, but she went straight to the core. Yes, he said softly. It was. She didn't reach for his hand this time, but the compassion in her eyes felt just as warm. As the conversation deepened, he learned about her too. About her childhood in Vienna. About her grandmother who had raised her when her parents were too busy traveling, chasing a life that never had space for a child. About the languages she learned because her grandmother insisted that the world opens wider for those who speak more than one tongue. She admitted she worked at the restaurant not because she lacked ambition but because she was saving, slowly, carefully, piece by piece, to return to school. You want to study? He asked softly. She nodded. Linguistics. Or translation? I haven't decided yet. You'd be incredible. Her cheeks warmed at the compliment. You don't even know that. I do, he said simply. I've heard you switch between 3 languages in a single shift. 4, she corrected. I speak French too. Of course she did. Time slipped by unnoticed. The sunlight shifted across the floor, the quiet library filled with the gentle murmur of afternoon. At some point, Lucas glanced at his watch and blinked. It was nearly 2. You're missing meetings, she said with a hint of guilt. I made the meetings, he replied. I can move them. You can't move a whole corporation around just because you're having coffee with me, she whispered, embarrassed. He looked at her, really looked, and felt a warmth spread slowly in his chest. I'd move the whole city if it meant talking to you a little longer. Her breath caught again. She looked away quickly, brushing her hair behind her ear. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I don't know what to do with them. He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. Not touching her, just closing the space by a few inches. You don't have to do anything with them. They're mine to feel. Yours to hear. That's all. Greta drew in a slow breath. You make everything too intense. He exhaled a quiet laugh. I've been told that. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like she was trying to piece him together. Do you actually know how to be gentle? He didn't answer at first. Not because he didn't want to, but because he genuinely didn't know. I can learn, he said finally. She held his gaze for a long time, long enough that he felt something shift between them again, something fragile and new. Okay, she whispered. Then I'll learn with you. A faint tremor ran down his spine. He didn't reach for her hand, but she reached for his again, this time with less hesitation, less fear. Her fingers slid into his, warm and certain. Would you like to walk? He asked quietly. She nodded. They stepped out of the library into crisp air, sunlight spilling through tall buildings. The city was alive around them, buzzing with traffic and movement, but it all felt distant, like the two of them were moving inside a quieter world tucked beneath the noise. Lucas kept his hands in his coat pockets, giving Greta space, but she surprised him. As they walked along the river, she stepped closer, just enough that their shoulders brushed. The simple, innocent contact hit him harder than any boardroom victory. It felt real. Unforced. Chosen. They walked without speaking for a while, comfortable in the silence, as if each step settled another piece of uncertainty between them. Finally, Greta stopped near the railing and turned to face him. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? He frowned, genuinely confused. Why you what? Why are you interested in me? Well, she gestured helplessly at him. You're you. He stepped closer, very slowly, and shook his head. Greta, you think I'm impossible to reach because of my job. But do you know how hard it is to reach me emotionally? How long it's been since anyone even tried? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. You walked into my world with a tray of food, he continued quietly, and you somehow saw past everything people usually get stuck on. You didn't care about status. You didn't care about power. You didn't care that I'm difficult, abrupt, or sometimes cold. Her eyes softened. He saw it, the moment she understood he wasn't flattering her. He was telling the truth. You paid attention to the parts of me no one else has bothered to notice in years, he said. That alone, that was enough. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. You make it sound like I saved you. No, he murmured. You didn't save me. But you made me want to stop hiding. Her breath quivered, and that's everything. Silence wrapped around them again, but it wasn't heavy, it was charged, warm, waiting. Greta looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Lucas, can I tell you something too? Of course. When I replied to you in German that night, I didn't know who you were. I didn't care. I just wanted to do my job. She smiled faintly. But after that, I kept thinking about you. Not because you're a CEO. But because you seemed lonely. I didn't know why, but I felt it. His chest tightened, and then yesterday, when I saw how angry you were in the boardroom, she hesitated. I wasn't scared of you. I was scared that I had misjudged you. That maybe I imagined the softness I saw in you that first night. Her voice trembled, but then you came to find me. And that told me everything I needed to know. He felt something inside him break open, quietly, gently. Greta, he whispered, stepping closer, you didn't misjudge me. She smiled then, a small, determined smile. The kind that said she wasn't running anymore either. Good, she whispered, without thinking, without planning. Lucas lifted his hand, then paused just shy of her cheek. He waited, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She leaned in, his fingers brushed her skin, warm and soft beneath his touch. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, leaning into his palm, and the simple gesture stole the breath from his lungs. He hadn't realized how much he needed that contact. Or how long he had been starved for something so gentle. When her eyes opened again, they were bright, not with fear, but with the fragile courage of someone choosing something new. Lucas, she whispered, I think I want to see where this goes too. His heart climbed into his throat. Slow, he asked softly. Slow, she agreed, and then, hesitantly, carefully, but without trembling, she rose onto her toes and pressed a soft, barely there kiss to his cheek. It was nothing, and it was everything. By the time she stepped back, his pulse was racing like a boy's. Greta smiled, warm, certain, and a little shy. Come on, she said gently. Walk me home. He nodded, finding his voice only after a moment. Always. They walked side by side, not touching, not rushing, letting the quiet build around them like a beginning. And somewhere inside him, a truth settled with startling clarity. He didn't just want Greta. He needed her, not because she filled a void he couldn't name, but because she reminded